Hello, I would like to tell you a little bit more about paper proposals or research proposals. So there's already one video on research proposal, but I want to show you another example. Um, so it's very important to have a title that is as descriptive as possible, yet it should be brief, so not super long. Although for the purpose of the proposal, it would be perfectly fine to have a longer title, and you can edit it down later on. Uh, but if we were to, have a title on analysis of melody, harmony, form, and texture in Ravel's Tombeau de Couperin, then it's pretty clear, it's very descriptive, and we know exactly what the focus of the paper will be. So then the proposal itself at first needs to give some background information and also inform about existing literature on that topic. So that requires, of course, searching in databases such as Realm, Music Index, Music Periodicals database, but also JSTOR, and Project Muse, and perhaps some other non-music databases, depending on the topic. You need to do some searches, start assembling a bibliography, start reading, or at least start reading the abstracts for those other publications, so you know what other authors have done, and then you can write the background as well as a summary of what other authors have done. So in this case, it says Maurice Ravel and many of his contemporaries drew inspiration from the past for their compositions during the neoclassical movement in the early 20th century. The French tombeau, which had fallen out of favor in the 17th century, was revived in the works of many French 20th century composers. Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin is a popular example of this revival of the tombeau, and its combined stylistic qualities from the Baroque period and the 20th century. In their dissertation, and so here is an explanation of or a discussion of some other literature on that topic. In the dissertation, Byung-Yum Ko explains the historical significance of the tombeau and neoclassicism, analyzes each movement of Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin, and briefly addresses the differences between the original work and the orchestral transcription. Most of the remaining literature focuses on analyzing the neoclassical characteristics of the original piano composition or neoclassical characteristics of several composers. So here's a general summary of existing literature related to this topic, and that literature will then be listed in the bibliography, right? Whether named or not named. And the more detailed you prepare the proposal, the longer the bibliography will get. Anyways, and then of course you have to say what your paper is about, what sources you will use, what questions you want to answer, what methods you will use, perhaps even address of what audience you're targeting with your paper, so who would be interested in reading it, maybe even speculate on a possible outcome of your research. So this particular example that one of my students wrote in the past, and it's a very good proposal, says, my research will focus on the prelude of Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin. And in fact, in that case, if it's the focus on the prelude, then probably that can go also directly into the title. I will analyze the melody, harmony, form of the piece, and I will also examine and compare the added timbre factor provided by the modern orchestral arrangement to the original piano version. So there it is in very clear language of what this research will do, what this paper will describe. I hope to identify how Ravel uses different textures in the orchestra to allow growth in the piece. So in this particular case, it's very difficult to actually speculate on a very specific outcome, but generally speaking, the author here hopes to show how Ravel uses different textures in the orchestra. So in order to make these comparisons, I will use the piano and orchestra scores as well as recordings of both versions in my analysis. So there is something about both the method, the analytical method, as well as the sources, in this case primary sources, the piano version and the orchestra score. So due to the limited literature written on Ravel's prelude to Le Tombeau de Couperin, many of the articles, dissertations, and theses that I will use in my research will focus on the piano version. Maybe that sentence is not quite as clear and can be made clearer. Anyways, then a good proposal will also contain a timeline. So if this is just an exercise for you to write a proposal without actually writing the paper, you can make up a timeline of what could potentially be a timeline. Maybe during the semester, if that is a term paper, a semester paper, and you need to leave probably plenty of time at the end to proofread, to revise, and then a suitable deadline also for turning it in. So this is a very nice timeline for a spring semester that would start in January and end at the beginning of May, and then the bibliography itself. So now what is not directly said in this particular proposal, but it's kind of indirectly said, is the originality of the research. So how we define research is that you do something, you don't just assemble information that is somewhere out there, but you assemble either information in a new way or you find new information. In this case, it's actually new analytical information. It is implied here. But proposals are always best to point out what is the original contribution to the scholarship, so the originality. So now if we then expand and revise the proposal, we should also include an anticipated table of contents with chapter titles. And if the final paper is short enough that it doesn't really need chapter titles, or at least not a numbering, then you can leave those out later. But for now, it might be good to number, or here to say introduction, and here chapter 1, background information about Ravel and his time. Chapter 2, existing literature on Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin. Chapter 3, an analysis of the orchestra version, or an analysis of the piece, and there could be subchapters on the piano version, on the orchestra version, and specifically focusing on melody and harmony and form and texture. So you can create subchapters and sub-subchapters, and that will make it much easier to actually write the paper, even if you don't end up using those sub-chapter headers in your paper. But it will guide you writing a paper. It chunks down the work, and so it will make it much easier to write the paper. Excuse me. Anyways, I hope this helped you thinking a little bit more about proposals and what proposals need to contain. Send me an email if you have any questions or suggestions. Bye.